What's up guys, it's Emperor John Kill 3D Gaming here with another video, and today I've been waiting for this game to come out. As you all may know, last year we were given Resident Evil 2 the remake in 2019, and it was my game of the year. Why? I made a video on that. If you want to see why I call it game of the year, be sure to look up, go ahead and look at my why Resident Evil 2 is best game of 2019. But there's been a couple of misconceptions going on and a couple of odd ways people are taking this new game. Obviously, they're holding it to the high standard of Resident Evil 2's remake, which was the perfect way you can remake a game. I mean, the Resident Evil series has finally gone back up in the eyes of gamers and in the public's eye. Resident Evil is made its comeback. The Revelation series were, to hold us over. They were good, but they weren't great. The remakes are showing us what Resident Evil can be done if it just goes back to its roots while including the more modern gaming styles. Resident Evil 3's remake puts you back in the shoes of Jill Valentine, and a lot of people were upset how she looks. Jill Valentine, there's nothing wrong with her in this game. In fact, she's top-notch as in any game she's in. She feels obviously much closer to her Resident Evil 1 counterpart, since this game is taking place during Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, during around that early 90s era. And this game is Resident Evil. Think of Resident Evil 2 if Resident Evil 2 had a fast forward button. This game will take you about, depending your difficulty and depending if you want to 100% the areas like it brought back from Resident Evil 2, it takes you about 15 to 18 hours. It roughly took me, I want to say 18 to 19, but that's because I kept getting cornered by Nemesis in certain sections, and the enemies this time around are much more spry. They're not stationary. They're actually doing like zombies or infected. Now, special infected, they pop up out of the blue like the Nemesis will. In certain sections going into the sewers, certain sections above Raccoon City, even one where it shoots parasites into your stomach and you have to use the green herb to get it out. But this game does feel more combat oriented than Resident Evil 2's remake, where it brought in the modern control styles, but it kept that thick horror atmosphere. Now, where Resident Evil 3 succeeds, in my opinion, is when you're dealing with the character of Nemesis, who hawks you throughout this whole game with different weapons, his boss battles, even defeating him in the random encounters where Mr. X you did best to just avoid. But Nemesis, attacking him and shutting him down temporarily, he will drop weapon upgrades, which I'd recommend master the art of self-movement in this game. Master your movement. Therefore, Nemesis will, as challenging and relentless as he may be, it will be much easier for you to fight with him and deal with him. There's also environmental hazards you can use to slow him down. He will alternate between multiple weapons. More weapons that I didn't even think he was going to use, unlike in the original. Some of the scenarios are playing out the same. And I know it's disappointing that there is no A and B scenario, which I agree with you. I wish there was like a alternate scenario system going on in this game. But you can guarantee any cut content or anything that the fans have wanted for this game, you can guarantee Capcom's going to put it back for free like they did those Lost Survivors, or I think it was called the Lost Survivors or the Missing Survivors, the Fourth Survivor, the extra survivor modes in Resident Evil 2. So, but the presentation this time around, when it comes to the cutscenes, I do feel that Jill, this game alone, really makes you love Jill all over again. Her voice actress, her character model, plus she takes a rocket to her face. that is a bad bitch, okay? Because not only does this game give you the serious tone and brings back the seriousness of what made those original games frightening and threatening with the enemy roster and the multiple infected creatures you will be finding, it balanced the action side. This is what makes it different. There's not a lot of puzzles that you need to do. It's just more by where the first game, Resident Evil 2's remake, is more hindered by the original. This one is not hindered by Resident Evil 3's original. A lot of the puzzles that people didn't like were taken out, and it's more like environmental things going on here, which is fine by me. I don't have an issue with that. I don't mind now that they balanced the action-oriented nature of Resident Evil and the horror aspects of Resident Evil. That's why I thought that this game, regardless of what it cut or anything like that, it was going to maintain the core concepts that Resident Evil 2 introduced. And even bringing back familiar locations, because remember, this game takes place before, during, and after Resident Evil 2. It takes place showing you the little initial stages in the opening cutscene, then we're playing during the events of RE2, but as Jill in her side of the story on the other side of the city. We meet Carlos Oliveira, we meet Nikolai, we meet all these characters in situations that they were not introduced in originally. A lot of their appearances are different. Some characters appear earlier, some characters appear later. The Nemesis, he does different things than he did to you that time around. He will pursue you. He will jump after you. He will use that tentacle. He actually feels like a threat, and I'd much rather deal with the hulking, slow movement of Homeboy Mr. X than Nemesis. But Nemesis does his job. And what do I think of his redesign? He has an aesthetic that fits this game. You see they try to keep a lot of his old aesthetic and mix it with a new aesthetic. A lot of people were complaining about the whole nose job thing. I mean, whether Nemesis has a nose or not, he's a threat. He is threatening. I mean, just as threatening as the regular zombies. There's more enemies that litter the map if you're not careful, and doing what you did in RE2, trying to avoid them, is a lot harder to do this time around. But if you play Resident Evil 2 and you play this one, back to back, or you jump right into this one right after that, it is a nice change of pace and a nice change of feel. Yes, it is disappointing that they cut out the mercenaries mode, that they cut out a lot of extras, which I'm sure they're going to be saving for DLC. But what they managed to leave and what they have included does make up and filter out a lot of the criticism. And if you watch videos now on this game, people are just focusing way too much on the criticisms and not focusing on what the game actually does. And the game really does recreate RE3 with not only making the story much more coherent in these cutscenes, but also when you run into the familiar characters, you'll recognize their lines from the old games, and you'll recognize many locations revamped from the old game. But like I said, you will also visit locations from the RE2 remake, which is also a good thing. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is a lot of people are criticizing this particular section of the game. I'm not, because this is actually what I wished was in the original game, and this could have worked as an A or B scenario or 2 campaigns, and maybe we'll get that in the future with Capcom, depending how people take to Carlos. Now, Carlos's campaign is heavily expanded from Resident Evil 3. You play as him a lot longer. You play as him, his sections are a lot more military action-esque. But it's even worrisome because the enemies are relentless in his portion. So if there's one thing I do criticize about this game, is that I wish if they brought back the A and B scenarios, 2 storylines, this would have been the opportunity to do it with Carlos Oliveira and Jill. Have Jill do her own campaign and have Carlos do his own campaign and have them cross paths like Leon and Claire did. But I can understand how tight their campaigns were in the original. You know, some moments you needed Carlos, and some moments was more so about Jill. So I can get that trying to find a balance to not only retell the story of this game, but to balance these two characters would probably be challenging, or it could have been easy and they just opted not to do it. You know, there's a lot of possibilities on what could have gone on. But these Carlos Oliveira sections, they're not as bad, or they're not bad at all, that has been criticized. They're actually fun to play, where Jill is the more exploration, where you search the maps, dealing with Nemesis, all those, you know, all that jazz. But Carlos gives you that feel of, okay, I'm playing as an Umbrella mercenary. I might not have the mercenaries mode, but at least I'm in the shoes of not only a liked Resident Evil character, a cool one at that, because I wish Carlos was in a lot more games. Hell, if he's liked in this game by the fans and the community, I think Carlos deserves his own game where he's fighting his own battle against the T-virus or any virus in another part of the world or part of the country. You know, where was Carlos in all these other games? You know? And with that, I feel that Resident Evil 3's remake, it may not be, you know, trying to say that it's better than Resident Evil 2, that's not the case, but it's not below it either. It's just right there. Both games have their strengths, both games have their weaknesses. Resident Evil 3 is on par with Resident Evil 2's remake. And then I have to discuss with you guys the multiplayer, but that will be done in a separate video. This is Emperor John Kill 3D. Catch y'all later.